and how that's developed. You know, things have certainly moved forward. I'd first like to talk about bars, restaurants and hotels. It's where the majority of the beer is sold, and really important. There's been a lot of openings in the year, a lot of craft beer bars, a lot of tap rooms. Rohit and Tracy both opened tap rooms in the last year. Rohit?
Yeah, I think...
Came on.
So yeah, I think Toby, that's right. A lot more tap rooms have opened, a lot of them with different flavors and sort of focuses and things like that. We've, on the positive side, you know, we've, like Toby said, lots of local beer represented in these tap rooms, a lot more imported beer coming in, style variety increasing, and just availability is broader across many different parts of Hong Kong. On the other hand, I think what we'll probably talk about a bit more is what's not gone so well. I mean, not every tap room, not every bar, every hotel that is now stocking craft beer is necessarily paying attention to every little detail and investing time and effort into education and into everything from the right sourcing, the right storage, and things like that. So I think a lot of us in the industry are trying to hopefully see that improves and there's more education and more emphasis on going to the next level.
One thing we were talking about last year was there's a lot of small independent bars and restaurants that are embracing craft beer, but what was really missing in the Hong Kong market was higher end restaurants, higher end bars and hotels taking it seriously. Tracy, as a distributor, have you seen more interest from higher end restaurants and hotels?
Definitely. The higher end restaurants and bars or hotels in particular, I think, are very taken with local breweries and the local brands. They do typically like, well, obviously the clientele are tourists, so it does make sense for them to stock the local breweries. They do come back and ask for imported brands as well, because obviously imported brands have a certain brand association with them that identifies with the customers that come from abroad. But yeah, I think that they're starting to filter into the different hotels and they're selling well.
Is it more new restaurants that are opening and new hotels that are taking craft beer more seriously, or is it more established places that are rethinking their strategy and adding things?
For us personally, it is the more established hotels and the restaurants. So obviously the younger cafes, the hipper restaurants, they start picking up craft beer because it's a trend, because their customers love it, and then it comes from the consumers. When the consumers start to request for it, obviously the higher end restaurants and bars think that they have to stock it to cater to their customers, and that's starting to go very well.
Shaheen, is it enough to add craft beer to a beer list and expect it to sell itself?
I think there's two ways of looking at it. So first, there's obviously, by accepting and putting craft beer on your menu, you're already giving your consumers a bigger choice, right? So in that sense, you should tend to see a different set of sales numbers at the end of the month once you place craft beer, because people are now coming in saying, ooh, there's a different option. I don't have to drink the big macro brands that I've been drinking for however long. But on the other hand, there may be a sense of a bar or restaurant not taking enough risk, not differentiating enough. It obviously is not enough to just sell itself when it's on there. The staff need to be educated. The menu on the first hand obviously needs to be accurate in the first place. The choice needs to be varied enough. I mean, there's no point putting like 6 pale ales on a menu, that are too similar to each other. Then you're kind of counteracting what you're trying to do in the first place. So yeah, I think there's two ways to it. I mean, in the first hand, the bar needs to accept and have it on the menu in the first place to offer options to consumers, but on the one hand, there has to be education around it in terms of staff, in terms of management, and in terms of overall presentation to the consumer as well.
So Philip, from a consumer perspective, do you think frontline hospitality staff in Hong Kong know enough about the beer they're selling?
No. how do I say that without selling my services as I do training for bars and restaurants? But no, I think bars and restaurants selling beer in Hong Kong. There are a few bright shiny stars that I think we all know about who they are, but I think there are like more than half of them that are positioning themselves as craft beer bars or selling a lot of craft beer. They're just in it for the money. They see it as a trend. They see it as a quick way to jump on something that's popular right now, and that's not really how you can treat craft beer if you're such an outlet. And I think we all know that the F&B industry, the bars and restaurants in Hong Kong, it's generally short-sighted, like quite bad service in general. Like I think if you compare bars and restaurants to North America or Europe, and craft beer is a product that needs a lot of care and attention. It's you can't treat it as your normal beer. It's absolutely impossible. You're going to end up with a really bad outcome, and I see that a lot of times now in Hong Kong, like bars. So there are unfortunately too many bars and restaurants that are not treating craft beer the way it should be treated right now.
I find it to be, sorry, just to butt in, I find it very similar to when wine started to become very big in Hong Kong. A lot of restaurants would flood their menus with French or specifically Bordeaux wine because they thought that wine was only good from Bordeaux, or wine was only good from France, or champagne was only good from champagne, or certain brands, right? It's all about flooding the menu because what you think is hip and hot at the time. But you end up disrespecting the product and undermining your customer at the end of the day.
So, if there's training needed to be given there, is it the responsibility of the bar owner, the restaurant owner, the distributor, the brewer? Whose responsibility is the training?
Personally, I think it's a responsibility that could reach out to many different facets of the business. So the owner of the business should take responsibility to make sure that the staff who are selling the product should know what they're selling and present it in the best possible way to their customers. On the other hand, coming at it from our perspective as a distributor, our staff, who are the salespeople, being out there selling it to the restaurants and bars, we should be conveying I suppose we should be teaching or training the staff, our staff, how best to sell the product to the restaurants and the bars, and that should then filter through and come back down to the consumers. So it's a bit of the responsibility of everybody in the industry to grow it properly, and to make sure that the beer is presented in the best possible way as the brewer intended to the consumers in the end.
And it's not just about how you sell the beer, it's not just about how it's presented to the customer, it's about the storage, it's about the service, it's about putting that product out with the best intentions. I know, Rohit, you do a lot of brewery tours and a lot of training. How do you find that, and how is that received from restaurant and bar staff?
Yeah, look, firstly I agree with Tracy that learning is definitely a two-way street. We can't just do a session, throw a lot of knowledge at people and expect it to sort of retain and be implemented in practice. So we've done lots of sessions at the brewery where, say, a restaurant group can send its staff for an afternoon. So I'll tell you what works well and what doesn't. So I think it's definitely really good for them to visualize the brewing process, to see really firsthand how beer is made, and really understand, really sort of dispel some of the commonly held misperceptions about beer. What gives it color, what gives it, alcohol strength, what's a lager, what's an ale, like the real basics. And then sort of we try to get into more technical information, some of which we give back to them to go back and read on their time and sort of spend more effort into it. What we found is, some of the staff always would be really enthusiastic, really into it and interested and learn. But a lot of people would come, enjoy the beers, and mostly forget about it, and it won't change how they really do things at their outlet. So it really is a two-way street. We see people in the industry, distributors, brewers. We definitely need to take responsibility of teaching people about the products we are selling. But at the same time, I think there needs to be a lot more initiative on the side of bars, restaurants, retailers to make sure they actually, make it sort of a core part of their business operation, to train their staff and to recruit staff that will actually be more interested in learning, and this will get more and more important, and ultimately there's no shortcut to it. You have to put in the hard work to learn.
I think craft beer as a product takes more looking after, it takes more selling. Traditionally, bars and restaurants in Hong Kong farmed out their beer operations to macros, and the macros took care of everything. They installed their lines, they did everything. With craft beer, you need to be a little bit more involved. You need to know what you're selling, you need to know how you're selling it, you need to know how your draft system works, you need more background yourself as a bar operator. I know this myself, and then you need to pass that on to your staff, so they need to know the importance. It's not just something that's going to bring people through the door, it needs more nurturing, it needs more looking after. Anything more to add on there? Do you want to move on to breweries?
I guess just one more thing to add is the fantastic thing about this industry is that it's such a social industry. People are in it because they love the beer, they love drinking beer, they love learning what the craft beer stories are about. And as more and more people start to come through into the industry, they start to filter into the bars and restaurants, and as bar owners or restaurant owners, you can start employing these people and building upon their passion. And I think that's the main thing to move forward as an industry.
No, I
today.
agree. It's
I think
about
that,
passion.
yeah, and I think that comes with time as well, right? As the industry grows, you have more people who are interested who then end up passing on that passion on to other people who are interested and end up working at the bars, right? So we've seen over time that maybe 4 or 5 years ago it would have been tough for a bottle shop or a second draft or tap to actually find people interested, but now it's becoming, I wouldn't say easy, but it's becoming a little bit easier because there is some interest. Whether or not the level of education is there, there's a keenness to learn, which is, I think, you have to start with that, right? Like, you have to start with an interest in the subject, and then from there create an craft beer, like you said, is social, it's engaging, so it's about growing the number of people in the city that are interested, that filters through to the bars, that gives the customer a better experience.
I mean, that's why we all got involved in craft beer, it's because of the passion. It's not a money-making exercise. I mean, we can all money, a lot more money otherwise, but it's that passion, embracing it, and it just makes it easy to get up and go to work in the morning if you're enjoying yourself, and there's a pint at the end of the rainbow. Right, let's move on to breweries. I think we've now got 20 brewing operations that are either open in Hong Kong or we're going to be open very soon. Too many, Shaheen?
I personally don't think so. I think the danger comes when they all start to become very similar, or start doing the same things because someone else is doing it, or try to copy what's being imported. I don't think that's where the danger comes, where you start to question, like, right, how many pale ales can this market really soak up? How many IPAs can this market soak up? I think the question too many in regards to Hong Kong breweries doesn't apply if breweries go out there and be different, be Hong Kong, represent Hong Kong, use local ingredients, use regional ingredients, collaborate with local breweries, collaborate with regional breweries, like, be different to what's being imported, but also be different from the guy down the road or the girl down the road that's brewing great beer as well. You don't have to carve out a market or try and break into a market that already exists. It's an art, right? Craft beer and brewing is an art form. So with any form of art, you don't know what's possible until you try it or until you innovate, right? You don't know what a beautiful painting is until it's done when you see it. So craft beer is the same, because you try with crazy ingredients, you put together crazy ideas, and the whole point is that people tell you you're crazy. And then you come out with something amazing, and everyone's like, he was the first one to do it, and no one else could probably do it that way. And like, you're recognized and loved for it. So I don't think there are too many. I think it's a matter of breweries finding or solidifying their identity. Like, what makes them Hong Kong? What makes them different? What makes them not the other one?
Yeah. I agree. I mean, we try and support a lot of local breweries in the globe. What we find is difficult is balancing our styles, because everyone makes an IPA, everyone makes a pale ale, everyone makes a win. What we are looking for is something that's a little bit different, that gives us balance in our taps, that's enables us, if we could have all local breweries on tap, would quite gladly have all local breweries on tap. Just at the moment, there aren't all those styles filled. Rohit, why do you think that is? Why are the breweries following similar lines?
I can probably speculate. I don't exactly know why, but I think some of it could be perception of what some breweries think the market wants, and I think this is a common sort of. I get asked this question by journalists and other people all the time, like, what do you think is the Hong Kong palate? What do people here like? And I don't like that question at all, because I don't think there is such a thing as a Hong Kong palate. And even if there was, the only way to find out was by doing many different things. If we were to go by market data or research or what's worked in the past, we'd make something that resembles San Miguel, and that's the thing that is sold in the past. So I think some of it could be that, in the craft beer market, there's this perception that RPBs are sort of the gateway, and people tend to do that. So, some of it could be pressures related to Hong Kong's cost structure. So let's go for something safe that could sell, which sort of curtails innovation a little bit. But I think, particularly for the smaller breweries, I think if they were to experiment more, they might be surprised by how well some of these things, if well executed, would be received. We try to do a lot of that. We do one-offs every 3 to 4 weeks, and those are some of the most popular beers these days. So I think Hong Kong could do with definitely more sort of more beers that express a point of view, and brewers doing what they like without thinking about the market, and chances are it'll actually probably work.
I mean, when you launched your Cha Cha Tangoze, did you even think it would be as well received as it was?
No, not at all. I mean, we brewed it. We brewed it because we wanted to brew a sour beer. We wanted to brew a goza, and we thought it would fit well with the climate. And we brewed it as a one-off last year. It's very popular. Brewed it again, and now we are committed enough to make it a year-round, and we're doing larger batches of it. But it started as an experiment, and we will continue doing many more experiments.
Philip, as a consumer, how would you like to see the local brewing scene develop?
Well, as we said, with creativity and boldness, like I think some other local breweries, they're stuck in some American brew pub 90s mentality of making an amber, an IPA, and a pale, and a brown, and that's it. Kind of, it needs to be more. I think, as Rohit said, it's consumers are willing to try new things and interesting stuff. But I really like supporting local breweries, but sometimes you wonder why they put out a certain beer. To be honest, like it's maybe I think it's not easy to start a brewery in Hong Kong. Like it takes a lot of space. Space is expensive. Hong Kong probably has the highest fermenter square footage space in the world. So if you had a beer sitting in there for 3 or 4 weeks fermenting, and then you kind of turn out in a way, you might not be super happy with it, but you're kind of forced to try to sell it to certain places because it just you gotta get some money rolling in. So, and that kind of thing might hurt your brand and the long-term success of craft beer. So it's not easy in that sense. And as a consumer, I always try, and I really seek out local beers, try them out. And a lot of times I'm very pleasantly surprised. A lot of times I'm also very disappointed.
It's about
Towards Rohit, because so much of local beer scenes develop about what's grown locally, and so I wonder how you think that challenge is going to affect the development of Hong Kong craft breweries, since so little ingredients grow here, or so few ingredients.
I think I fundamentally think beer is, unlike wine or cider or other things that are single fresh ingredient driven. The majority of craft breweries all over the world essentially buy bulk from a handful of suppliers. They have access to the exact same ingredients. To me, the fundamental part of brewing is about the brewing process, and obviously you need to get that right. to us in Hong Kong, the local aspect may not so much be ingredient driven, but more concept driven. Understanding, history and culture of food and drinks and taking inspiration from that. Some ingredients that may not be Hong Kong grown but are used a lot in Hong Kong traditionally, say, dried mandarin peels and teas and flowers. There's plenty of things to draw inspiration from. Sour plum tea, so it has to be what you have to look at the world around you in Hong Kong and see what actually makes sense to incorporate into beer. When we design a new locally inspired beer, we try to be rooted in some traditional beer styles and try to adapt it. We don't like to throw a random local ingredient just because, just for the sake of it. It needs to make sense as a beer, it needs to stand on its own 2 feet as a beer. That's sort of the first test. And then, again, in Hong Kong, it's probably never going to be about fresh local ingredients. It's going to be about food and drink concepts.
And I think just to add to that again, obviously I'm not a brewer, so I look at it from a consumer perspective and sort of from a branding perspective as well. I think consumers really, at the heart of it, buy into why, right? They buy into the why of any company, no matter what the product is. They'll never buy, like when you compare to smartphones, you'll probably go for probably one of the biggest brands in the world because they have strong brand identity, right? And I think that's one thing Rohit has done extremely well with Young Master Ales is create a strong brand identity that no matter what they put out, people are going to want to try it because they buy into why he does it or why the team do it or what they're about, what the story behind it is. I mean, I think in the beginning of any process of when you want to start a company, or in this case obviously a brewery, it's important to ask yourself, why am I doing this? What's the story behind my beers? What makes sense in terms of the styles that we're going to make? And I mean, even from Laurie, I'm sure you realize from a distributor perspective, when we look at brands that we want to bring into Hong Kong, the brand story is very important as well, right? It feeds through into the beers that they make and everything that they do, whether it's seasonal or core. So brand story and marketing and the ethics behind the company are all important things. So
I'll fire this back at you, Rohit, but maybe other people want to comment on it. With Hitachino and Little Creatures opening in Hong Kong, it's bigger budget breweries coming into town with probably a little bit more than the independents that have grown. How's that going to affect the smaller guys, and is that on a personal level affecting how you're looking at the market?
It's a difficult question to answer. I honestly don't know what will happen, but I think overall it's a good thing that they see Hong Kong, broadly China, as a place where they want to bring their own brand of beer and their own style of doing things. So overall it brings more variety and sort of maybe in some sense more professionalism to the industry as well. I personally think a locally grown brand is its own category, and an imported brand brewed here is its own category, also different from an imported brand brewed elsewhere. So there are different categories, and there's no real reason why all can't really coexist. And I think overall, more professionalism, more competition is a good thing. It means people will up their game, standards will rise, and overall it's positive.
Yeah, that's my idea as well. I think the more competition is healthier, and it just helps everyone up their game and improve things. Do we think at that broader spectrum that there's enough Asian influences in local beer? Or there's a lot of breweries that are following a more established kind of American model and brewing a little bit safer rather than diving in and...
I mean, like, I think, no, I don't think there's enough Asian influence. I think, because, when you've been around to some other brewers here in Asia, you see more, but of course there's some, of course, definitely there is. But I think, if you have a brewing system of 100 or 200 liters, you might as well throw in, if you find locally grown flowers, you don't have much to lose. Like, I think, I think local breweries need to be more bold and take pride and take identity in their place of Hong Kong and Asia. It can't just have like an American twist to it. I think I would love to see more. I mean, I think there's so many flavors out there in this city that no brewery has ever touched yet.
I think there's enormous potential, Tracy.
Can I just throw things from another perspective? Can we not argue that the local breweries should actually get their core range right and brew a really, really, really good pale ale before they start experimenting with a flour beer? You know what I mean? That's from the other perspective. If they can't even get the basic beer style right, should they really go about inventing a
But should they be opening a brewery if they can't do a pale ale?
No. Tough question.
I think it also comes down to, again, like how you define their core range. Because even in the, like for example, we've always known what an American pale ale is and what a British pale ale is, but over the last like 10 to 15 years, an Australian pale ale has emerged. So why can't we have an Asian pale ale? Not to say that it should have specific ingredients, but just brewed in a way that represents a brewery from Asia. Like, I don't see the point in a local brewery brewing an American pale ale that competes with the top American brands that are being imported here, because, like, what's the point? I just don't see the point in that.
So I think there's a couple of different things. First, to what Tracy pointed out about, do you want to make, well, I won't use pale ale as an example, a simple beer before you try to experiment a lot more. I think I'm more with Toby. I think fundamentally it's about, you do need the right brewing practices, you need the discipline, you need the documentation, you need a proper process regardless of whether you're experimenting or not. And if you have that, it ultimately, if you have that, you have a base and you can sort of build on it and you can brew anything. I don't necessarily believe that a pale ale needs to be a precursor to a flour beer. I think they're two different things. Fundamentally, any beer you make has to have solid, disciplined brewing practices. And I think to your point, Shane, about could there be an Asian pale ale? Perhaps, if enough breweries are brewing a style that is similar, has some similar characteristics. It won't come with one brewery doing it. It can only be classified as a style if most breweries are brewing something similar. But I completely disagree with the point you made about why should a Hong Kong-based brewery not make an American style pale ale or an Australian style pale ale. Fundamentally, I think there's lots of incredibly good American pale ales that I've tasted in the US or Australia, and in Hong Kong they've been completely oxidized or not fresh at all, and that factor is extremely important for local brewing. And regardless of style, I think that is a very important reason to do it. I don't, if lots of Hong Kong breweries start brewing American pale ales or British bitters and that becomes a Hong Kong thing, maybe that's the way to go. I mean, there's no point in predicting what that is, but fundamentals need to be right.
But surely with a locally brewed beer, whether it's a pale ale, whether it's an IPA, it's going to be fresher, it's going to be local to source, you've not got the transport issues, you've not got the storage issues. The idea is hopefully to brew a better version of anything that you can import.
And that's what I was really getting at. When I'm questioning what's the point, I mean, it's like, if it doesn't match up to it, what's the point, right? I think that's the kicker there. If it, like you're saying, if you can't get the fundamentals right of that style, then you're really you're putting yourself in a tight position, because I'm coming out from a point that it's always going to be compared, right? Like, if you're going to brew an American pale ale, I totally agree with you. You should go ahead and try it, but the fundamentals need to be right, and it needs to be better, I think.
But at the same time, it's only early days. We're 4 years in.
Local brewing, local craft brewing, I think not even 3 years in. I think when Hong Kong Beer Co. restarted and we started, that's like less than 3 years ago. So it's actually, in that sense, I think what local breweries have accomplished in a very short amount of time compared to a similar stage of development, pretty much any beer scene in the world, I think it's actually quite impressive, the type of range and quality that people have gotten to.
And I think at times we forget that. as well. We forget how new it is because we've all come, from a certain extent, we've come from more educated beer markets, and there's a lot of people coming into the Hong Kong market trying to force it in certain ways and trying to push it through. I think we should look, I think we should be looking at the fact that there's only 20 breweries in Hong Kong. You know, for the same density in the UK would end up with 150 breweries in Hong Kong, so something to look forward to. Yeah. Thanks.
Hi, it's Steve here from Burgundy Brewing in New Zealand. One of the things that's really interesting, what I'm hearing here, is that you're making so many different styles. But are the breweries actually focused on making styles to make money, or to continue to experiment and really feel the market here?
I would guess from my own experience, I think there's a little bit of both, and I think this is the point that we're getting at. I think there's two different things that's going on with the market at the moment. There's people that are in it for the passion, that are in it trying to develop the market, and there's a certain level of other people that are coming into it because they think it's the right thing to do, it's the right thing to form a business around. I think that's just a symptom of Hong Kong. You know, everyone imitates something that's successful, but I also think it's grown up so quickly and it's exploded so quickly that I think there's enough of both going on that the good will rise to the top. That's I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything.
I think last year when we did this talk, we talked a lot about how craft brewers were taking market shares from the bigger guys in terms of bars and so on. But then this year, I feel like both a consumer and working in the industry, there's so much more competition on a brewery level, on an importer level, on a bar level. So now, for example, in Central, we had an explosion of craft beer bars that are focused on that, and they kind of have taken consumers from each other. So you know, it's I don't know. My perception is that the competition has gone a little bit from just taking market shares from the big guys to also competing among each other. You know, I feel like there is a certain sense in the craft beer industry in Hong Kong. Like there's, you know, some might disagree with me. I feel like it seems like people are very, very competitive this year. I'm a little bit surprised that no more local breweries making collaborations with each other and, you know, doing things together like that. That's pretty not existent here in Hong Kong. While in other beer markets that happens a lot.
I mean, there's one thing having 20 breweries. There's no point in having 20 breweries all producing the same. They all need unique selling points. And what we talked about last year was whether it's the product, whether it's the price, whatever it is, there needs to be some settling, and people need to come out and have their unique selling points.
Yeah, and I think going back to your point, I get the feeling in the market that some breweries are maybe in a rush because brewing's not cheap. We know that. Hong Kong's specifically expensive, especially for space. So some breweries may feel that they have to get to scale quickly and therefore put out beers very quickly without really building that identity, that concept behind it. Maybe, you know, simple branding, but there does seem to be this kind of rush to just get beer out there in order to gain some scale, perhaps for fear of falling behind or fear of, you know, not long enough runway to keep the brewery open or whatever it is. But there does seem to be that kind of rush locally.
Stuart from Diversified. I had a question. I was here last year for the same panel discussion, and I recall Devlin from Hong Kong Beer Company being very optimistic about the growth, you know, talking about in 10 years we could have 20% of the market in terms of craft beer consumption. I wondered, well, there's a couple of questions. I wondered, first of all, a year on, how are we going against those sorts of, you know, optimistic predictions? Are we moving in the right direction? And also, are we also starting to see that there are two different sets of consumer? There's the hopheads, you know, the people who want to try the triples and the funky stuff, and then are we doing enough for the people who've never tried anything other than commercial lager before? Is there enough of those session beers, I think you would probably describe them as, on the market that somebody for the first time trying craft beer would say, yes, I'm interested in this, I'd like to sort of move to the next level?
I'll start off with that. From my perspective in the globe, we're definitely selling a lot more local beers. We're selling a lot more interesting beers. We've got 8 or 9 taps that are just local at any time, so that they definitely are taking, even in the globe, just as an example, they're taking over what we sell a lot more, and we're converting a lot of people from the macros that are now drinking the more easy access local beers. And that's how it starts, you know, you get them onto something and it's all kind of a knock-on effect. Anyone else want to?
Maybe just to your second question, are there enough lighter session beers and approachable beers? I actually think there's probably way too many of those and not enough of the interesting beers at the moment. I mean, the couple of bars that we are involved in, it's actually harder to find sort of well-kept and more interesting beers, and very easy to find, like, you know, lots of sessionable beers, varying quality, but those are easy to find.
But I also think the local lager would be a game changer.
I think coming from the other perspective, again, as an importer, I think a lot of the imports that we are bringing in is starting to head towards the stronger stuff, the more specialty stuff, basically to fill in the gaps that is not present in the market from the local breweries at the moment. Because that's what the beer connoisseurs want and lust after. They're always asking for the newer stuff, what's new, what's just come out from this brewery or that brewery, who and who are collaborating, and that's what we try and do, is to fill the gap in the market for that at the moment, until such a time when the local breweries get to catch up with their more experimental brews and get up to a certain level of quality put out there.
And this is what we were going to lead on to next, talking about importers and distributors. And last year we talked about the local breweries can only have an impact on the importers, and how that will then impact and how that will work forward. And one thing that we talked about was people bringing in more unusual things. You know, we've dropped our import craft beer taps. We've lost 7 or 8, so we only have 3 or 4 in the globe now. So we tend to pick imperial stouts, we pick sour IPAs, we pick things that aren't so readily available in the market to make it more interesting. And you find, Tracy, that people are asking for that, they're seeking those things out?
They are, but I suppose Toby's question really is, on the bottle shop in Bridges Street, why are we not having more local beers on tap? So we've got 20 taps, and out of that probably only 10% is from local breweries. And a lot of it comes from the curation of the beer list primarily stems from what we do as an importer, who we are, and what we started out doing. And the main reason why is because we're starting to bring in all those more, like I said just now, like the more experimental brews, the one-offs. You know, sometimes you only get a keg or 2 from America of an imperial stout that's rated, I don't know, 100 or something. And people want that stuff. People do. Again, it's a small segment of the market that is after the more experimental brews. They're usually the drinkers who have been abroad, or they've been educated abroad and they've come back, or the expats who have come and missed the brews that come from their homeland. And we, like I said, like that's the gap that we're filling. But I think as the market matures, you know, like 3 years ago when we started the bottle shop retail in cycle, I've been saying this a lot. The first 6 months we saw people coming in and asking what is craft beer, and the first 6 months was about us explaining 100 times a day what is craft beer. And then 6 months later, or even like now, every day somebody comes in and the first question they ask is what's new. So it's just, you know, like everybody has to, I think the local breweries have to start getting their act together and pushing forward and pushing the boundaries, and again get the fundamentals right, but then start experimenting. Because if you are a nano brewery, I think you have the economies of scale to make a small batch of something different, and don't be afraid to put it out there, or don't be afraid to throw it away if it sucks.
So importers, distributors. Shaheen, are you finding it best bet that customers are becoming more adventurous in styles and things they're looking for?
Definitely. I think customers are also becoming more educated about what's out there globally. They're demanding that we have like specialties and seasonals all year round, which obviously is physically impossible because they always want the adventurous and new stuff. Clearly there is a shift towards what we tell our customers we have, and now it's shifting more towards customers telling us what they want. So there's clearly that rise in level of knowledge about, you know, big craft brands around the world, or specialty beers or styles that they demand to have. Having said that, going back to the sessionable beer argument, our biggest sellers are still the sessionable beers because those are consumed at volume at places where beer is consumed at volume. So I think that from an importer and distributor and business perspective, you can't ignore that part of the business. You can't turn your head away just because you're a beer geek and you don't want to sell lagers or you don't want to sell pale ales. That is the core of your business. You have to do that in order to survive. But at the end of the day, you know, you have, as a business, as hard as it is, you have to try and please everyone. So it is important to be adventurous with the beer styles that we bring in, and we are finding demand for that as well.
We talked a lot last year about how Hong Kong had become, had a huge international selection of beers available with the duty dropping and imports, and how it was an easy market to get in. And before there was local breweries, how we developed a huge selection from around the world. And we talked about how we thought that would maybe drop off a little bit, but I've certainly not seen that drop off in the last year. I get approached by so many more importers. We probably get more samples dropped off in the globe every single week than we've ever had before. We're tasting a lot of beer. We're probably not buying a huge amount of great beer because there's just masses in the market. There's so much. Philip, any advice to someone that's looking to import beer into Hong Kong? Apart from don't.
Yeah. From a consumer perspective, like I think you know, we get some really good beer from the US, from UK, from Australia, New Zealand. I think we're really lacking good imported beer from Germany and Belgium. Like I'm a big Belgian beer drinker. I have nowhere to go and get a really good my kind of Belgian fix. It just it doesn't come in enough. So I think as a beer market, we have to see it as, you know, there should be good traditional beer bars here as well, and there should be German beer hall styles with good German beer as well. Like you can't just have American style tap rooms.
But there are German bars. There are.
I don't think they're good enough.
In what respect are they good enough?
I think the Belgian beer selection is a little bit underwhelming if you drink a lot of it, and I think again, you know, they could have put on a more aggressive, interesting way of doing it in terms of, you know, importers importing the beer from Belgium and Germany, and also bars and restaurant owners in terms of their staff knowing what they're selling.
Okay, this is this is probably something that I can tackle and start off with. We get, as I'm saying, we get approached the globe by a huge amount of importers and a huge amount of people that are bringing in beer, and a lot of them don't actually know what they're importing. They've got no idea what their beers are. They've got no idea what they're trying to sell. They just don't have the depth of knowledge that. We see this with the beer awards as well. At restaurant and bar, people enter things and they don't know what category they're entering their beers in. They don't know where things are going. They don't know, you know. And there's a lack of knowledge and that just leads me to think that people are purely in it just for the money. They're in it because they've heard the craft beers. They've heard that it's sticky and they've heard that's the way forward. You know, I think people should really consider what they're doing, and just because they've found a local beer that they like where they went to college or where they were overseas, it doesn't make it a good business to import it into Hong Kong. There's a lot more. There's so many beers that we tasted that just don't travel well, that lose all their hops, that lose their integrity. it's tough. Right. On that happy note. To conclude, we've talked about Hong Kong being a craft beer hub in Asia. The duty was dropped from wine at the same time as beer, and it's turned Hong Kong into a wine hub. All the wine auctions are here. Everything happens through Hong Kong. I still believe that Hong Kong can become that craft beer hub. I think what we're at the moment, we're in like a bit of a tipping point. I think there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of things going on, but I think there's also, in some respects, a lacking of education. There's a lacking of understanding of how we can move it forward in the right manner, how we can push things forward in a quality way. There's a lot more educational tools out there. There's BJCP exams coming up, there's Cicerone exams coming up next year. There's Philip, who's educating from 852 beer, which I've probably not mentioned before. There's brewery tours, there's loads of tap rooms you go and taste good beer. Anything you'd like to add to that, Philip? Or Shiki?
I think what I'd like to see is people in the industry as a whole take more risk. And I think risk also has to come with support. Because even from a best bet perspective, we have brought in beers that haven't traveled well, and we're honest about it. And we tell people, like, this hasn't traveled well, or what's your feedback on it? We know it hasn't traveled well, or stuff that's come in and we've outsold it and we can't get any more of it, So I think in terms an industry like this that's extremely social and everyone's in it for the love of the beer and just wants to educate everyone about better beer, there has to be a lot more of a support system. And I feel like bars and restaurants, well, some of them turn a blind eye to things like cleaning their taps, or selling oxidized beer, or selling beer past its sell-by date, and it's things like that if you turn a blind eye to, it just ends up giving the consumer a bad experience. So the more support there is in the industry to openly talk about these issues, the less fear people will have to hide them, right? Because then more people will come out and openly say, yeah, the beer is oxidized, it just didn't travel well, but we tried it, we risked it. Or local breweries moving into canning. I understand the MOQs are really high, but some of these breweries are backed by some serious money. So put up, go into cans, and take the risk. Like, it might not work, but if there's a support system, it really helps grow the industry in leaps and bounds. And I think that happened in wine. After a long period of tons of grain importing, lack of knowledge, it's the same thing. But now there's a lot more support system in the wine industry, and I think beer needs that. Beer really, really needs that.
Yeah. Any questions? Unless you've got anything to add?
Yeah, it's just, I think we're on a tipping point where it's dangerous if for example, I haven't been to any beer market where I had as many off-flavor beers in Hong Kong. But of course, that's a learning thing. Consumers learning when beer tastes bad, and bars learning what that might come from and how they can fix it. But it has to get right pretty quickly. Like, we can't go on with having unintentionally sour beer around town. Like, that might be a growth maybe like a mistake, but it needs to be fixed quickly, because we might turn off a lot of craft beer drinkers if things are not done right. And it's at a tipping point right now where I think some of our local drinkers were a little bit like, is this really going to go, we're at a point like, is this really going to be a positive next year or not? I'm not sure.
I think it'll be a positive next year. I think a lot of it comes from the local market as well. It was a very expat-driven market. The locals are starting to pick it up, and it's gaining a lot of traction, which is why a lot of bars, craft beer bars, are opening up around the project area in Mongkok. The locals need to also get up to speed with their education, and I think the main thing is to encourage everybody to stay very positive and to keep sending out positive messages about the beer you're trying. If you have a good beer, share it with everybody. There's a local beer geek community on Facebook. Share the good experience. Don't just share the bad ones, share the great ones. You know, tell people about why it's good, where you got it from, and that's how we grow, by keeping positive and not being, you know, like just dishing a bad beer that you had somewhere occasionally. It's entertainment, but you know, it's not positive.
It's often easy to criticise rather than it is to compliment.
It's more fun. It's more fun to criticize.
Any questions? Okay. Thank you very much.